Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Jeremy Champa. Today we're going to be looking at the 2017 April SAT. We're looking at the grammar section, aka the writing and language section, section 2. And we're going to look at the second half of that test, so questions 23 through 44. Okay, let's get started. Okay, folks, so this is number 23. And this question is about really two things, singular versus plural, and also the use of apostrophes in possession situations. So the first question is it singular or plural? It's probably plural because there's three answers, but let's see. As the Renaissance was reaching who or what's height? The Renaissance's height, so it's not there. Its height, possessive its. Okay, possessive its is answer choice A. ITS is possessive. IT apostrophe S, which I know apostrophes get used in possession all the time. But in this situation, because that would be somewhat confusing if it worked both ways, if IT apostrophe S meant both possessive, like the height that belongs to the Renaissance, or if it also meant it is, that would be a little bit confusing. So the powers that be have decided that IT apostrophe S is it is. And ITS with no apostrophe is possessive. So that's a good, important rule. I always remember it. Is this how you spell possessive? Hopefully. I always remember it with the idea that, like, this is two words. So the contraction demonstrates that we still have two words. This is just one word. So that's the way I remember it. Okay, moving on, number 24. These questions are purely, this is a preposition question. That is, it falls under the category of idiom, which just means style. And it's really unfortunate they even test this kind of thing. I don't know what their thoughts are about why they think we should test folks on this, because this isn't something that you can study and get better at. So anyways, this is about just sound. It was a triumph that added to Florence's reputation for sophistication and beauty. So don't overthink these questions. Look, if you're a non-native speaker, then do your best with these questions, but don't worry too much about them. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality, is that idiomatic questions are purely based on style. There's no rules that help you discern between answer choices in a general way. Certainly there's like a right and a wrong answer here, but that answer isn't easily discernible from a set of, overarching rules. So, unfortunate. Let's move on to the next question, number 25. Okay, so looking right away, I can just cross off B. The reason B is wrong is because, this is a question about, same thing with D. This is a question of word choice, and I can actually cross off A as I look through and see what A is as well. All these answer choices are informal. Cross off the informal stuff. Super rich, wow factor, fancy it up, increase its splendor is an actual way of speaking. Sorry to be a nerd about it, but all those other ways of speaking are things we get away with in speech. It's a colloquialism or informal language, but truly those words don't mean exactly what we want them to mean. We get away with it in speech, but we have to be precise when we're using the written word. Give it a wow factor. Fancy it up. Super rich. None of those are sort of accurate, by the books English. And one last thing I'd like to add about that, just in case people are saying, well, why we get to do what we want? We're going to remake the world. Cool. You can remake the world. But the thing is that language with precision communicates ideas effectively. Language without precision can be confusing and, in fact, can limit your ability to communicate the ideas that you want to communicate. So using very precise language is the best way to get your ideas across without any confusion, without any misinterpretation. Okay, number 26. We have they were placed, which were placed, placed, and then placing. Okay, so INGs are only right as a helping verb is sometimes the way they're used. I don't like that phrase because it's not a verb. Actually, it's not a verb. INGs are gerunds. That is, they are nouns that have been converted into nouns by putting an ing on something that was before an action or a verb. Okay, so the only way a helping verb or a gerund is correct is if it isn't the main verb of the sentence. That might work here. The reason I say that might work is because my eye comes to the beginning of the sentence and sees they wanted. That's almost a full sentence already. I mean, it could be. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral's exterior. Totally a full sentence. Remember the idea, hey, I've got to tell you something. Then you spit out the sentence. So that works here. Hey, I've got to tell you something. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral's exterior. Totally a full sentence. So it could work. What definitely won't work is they were placed. Because they were placed won't work because it'll create two full sentences. They were placed high on the buttress so that the art could be admired from afar. That's another full sentence. We can't have two full sentences separated by a comma, so that one's out. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral's exterior, placing high on the buttress so that the art. Well, the thing is, think about the idea of helping. This is a case in which maybe the idea of a helping verb maybe is useful. What verb is this helping? Who's doing the placing would be another good question. It's not clear because the words right before are certainly not the group doing the placing or the action that this helping verb is helping. So that's not going to work. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral, which were placed or placed. Okay, so it's going to be placed. The difference between these is interesting. Let's think carefully about this. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral's exterior, which were placed. Look, if you say which were placed, which seems to refer back again to the cathedral's exterior. It's unclear, right? When you use words like which, usually you're referring back to a word very close by. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral's exterior, which were placed. Now, it may seem obviously that it's not exterior, but if I change it to which was, maybe that would function the same way, and maybe then you could see the confusion. They wanted a series of statues to adorn the cathedral's exterior, which was placed high on the buttress. In that situation, there would be real and genuine confusion about the word were. There's also one other problem I just noticed. So the reason that would be confusing is that if you said was, it would match cathedral's exterior, which is singular. Singular cathedral's exterior, the exterior was, right? So if you saw the word was in answer choice C, it could really be confusing. The other problem that's actually a little bit more fundamental, and I just noticed this, is that a series of statues is singular. A series was placed high on the buttress. Really tricky. When you see this of statues, cross that off. In most cases, it doesn't help. In most cases, it confuses us. So you can't even say were in that situation, right? So this question became really, aside from being about full sentences and commas, also about singular versus plural. Singular, plural. So that was pretty interesting. And notice, like, I've done these questions before, but I have other things to do other than memorize every SAT question. And I actually think it's helpful if these videos aren't me with the perfect polished answer. I think these videos are helpful when you see someone with experience on this test work through the questions. So that's what I'm doing here. And I noticed something with the word were in that situation. Okay, moving on. And of course, remember, if you have any questions, if these videos are not meant to be the end of the conversation, they're meant to be the beginning of the conversation. So we just said 23, 4, 5, and I guess 6. So here's 27. Okay, let's see. We're looking at this section right here. Even worse, they had previously used it. Huh. Okay, so let's just look at our options. We have either other sculptors had previously used it or they. It was previously used by them before is usually going to be wrong because we've inverted the active sentence into a passive sentence. They used something, the subject they, or the sculptors used something, the subject sculptors. In either situation, those subjects do an action. They do something. Subjects with actions means that we have an active form. A sentence that is in the active voice. It was used by them. The subject is it. Does it do something in this sentence? No. It has something done to it. It was used by them. It just lies there. They are still doing the action, but they is now in the form them, an object of the sentence and not a subject of the sentence. That's not a good form. So we avoid that form usually at all costs. Now, here's what I'm noticing among the other answer choices and even within answer choice C. Previously used it, before, previously, and then previously. Okay, so that's always there. I was wondering if that was redundancy, but I guess not. Well, I guess the other major difference is other sculptors versus they. And because two answer choices use they, I'm banking on it being answer choice B. Let's see. It had been quarried for more than 4. So we're talking about this like block of marble. Nicknamed the Giant, the block had many problems. It had been quarried more than 40 years earlier and it started to weather from exposure to the elements. Even worse, we don't know who they is. There's no use of the phrase other sculptors earlier in like the previous sentence, so we need to be clear who it is that we're talking about. For that reason, answer choice B. Okay, the writer is considering deleting the underlined sentence. Should the sentence be kept or deleted? Okay, so with these questions, we don't worry about kept or deleted first, we worry about the reasons. Provides evidence to support the claim that Michelangelo would succeed where others had failed. That doesn't tell us, the idea of where it came from and where the quarry is has nothing to do with why he would succeed. Is Michelangelo from that place? This is what answer choice B says. It includes a detail that explains why the citizens of Florence might have been critical of commissioning a sculptor from a different city. I don't see that Michelangelo is from this place. Fantascriti, quarries of Carrara. No, that's out. Irrelevant information that distracts from the focus. Probably. Fails to explain why the block had already been made. No, it doesn't matter. So look, the answer, don't add it or delete it because it's random, because it's off topic, is the most common answer in the situation, and that holds true on number 28. Okay, cool. So if you have any questions, and let me actually back up for a second. Let me be clear about D. I want to be as clear as possible. Fails to explain why the block had not already been made into a sculpture. I mean, it certainly fails to do that, but it doesn't try to do that. And also, I don't think that's not a good reason to delete it. It's not a good reason to delete something to say, well, it doesn't do something that it didn't set out to do, right? Like there's other places where they could have done that. And so I don't think that that's a good reason to delete something, just generally speaking. So if I'm in between these two answers, just the fact that I know that this looks like a very common correct answer is a good enough reason for me to pick C when D doesn't have any, it's not tempting to me. So that's why I'm getting rid of it. If that explanation's not good enough, I totally understand. By all means, feel free to ask me further questions about that. If you put the question in different words so that I can really understand what you were thinking and why, maybe I can have a more detailed response. Anyways, in the meantime, here's 29, 30, and 31. So 29 is about verbs. I see that it's about verbs because it says reflected, reflected, reflect, had reflected, will reflect. So oftentimes these questions, the first thing I look for is I don't even worry about the tense. I just worry about singular and plural. One thing has reflected, one thing had reflected, one thing will. Okay, so there's no real difference between, they could all be singular. One thing reflected, many things reflected. One thing had reflected, many things have reflected. So there's certainly these are definitely singular. Many things had reflected. Oh, had reflected, it could actually be both, but has could not be both. Either way, I don't think it's about singular or plural. It's probably about actually the tense, which is it's less common, though still fairly common. I would say the majority of the time it's about singular plural. Okay, so who or what has reflected Renaissance? Sorry, I'm saying it like a British person. That's the way they say it, and they were saying it before we were saying it. Anyways, I'll say Renaissance from now on so I don't sound like a total nerd. The statue's form and posture echoed the proportions of classical Roman sculpture, but its expressiveness and level of detail. Ooh, those are two things. But these two things reflected. So, one thing has reflected, two things have reflected. It's not will reflect. We're talking about the past. Echoed in the past. Look, I'm looking for proof that it's B and not C, even though I already picked B, but hold on. Echoed the proportions of classical Roman. So these two verbs, the statue's form and posture echoed, but the expressiveness and level of detail at the same time reflected. So these two verbs should have the exact same verb tense because these characteristics, form and posture, that are acting or that are echoing, those are happening at the same time that the proportions. I'm sorry, the form, the expressiveness and level of detail. These two things are happening at the same time, right? Form and posture echo at the exact same moment that expressiveness and level of detail reflected, right? So we can't say had reflected because they're not at two different moments in time. One thing echoed, after the other thing had reflected. So had is a way of putting something further in the past, right? You say one thing happened in the past. Before that, something else had happened, right? So that's not what we have here. So answer choice B. Okay, number 30, to make this paragraph most logical, sentence 3 should be placed. Okay, so when you're doing these questions, you're looking for little words that matter the most. We have a but at the beginning of sentence 3. I think it should go at the beginning of the paragraph. Because, look, the previous paragraph, if we can remember, I could maybe even pull this up. So, look, this paragraph was talking about how it was like the block of marble was really had problems, and this was going to be difficult. And then this paragraph talks about the finished product being great. Intricately detailed, 17 foot high, solve the problem in sentence 2. The form and everything's great, right? It's done. Sentence 5, he had overcome the limitations of the marble block. So the word but connects these two paragraphs. Hard things, but he did well. But Michelangelo took on the giant with zeal. The giant is the name of the marble block that we mentioned in the previous paragraph. And he finished it in just 2 years. And then we start talking about what it looked like. So the little words matter the most here. The word but in this case is going to make it so that we should connect the two paragraphs that way. Right? So before sentence 1. Another thing you can do is you can examine what happens to the relationship with other sentence. So, I mean, like maybe like there's problems. I don't think in this case, as I take a quick look, that helps that much. But sometimes what you can notice is if you put it in another place, it messes up the relationship between the sentences that were connected before, right? If one and two really have to go together, then putting something in between could mess it up. Okay, so 31. Which choice gives us a second reason and additional support for the main idea of the paragraph? So we need something different than the first reason, and it needs to support the main idea. The main idea of this paragraph should be in the first couple sentences, maybe the first sentence. Upon viewing the stunning statue, guild members discarded the plan to hoist the statue to an exterior buttress. It was far too beautiful. Okay, so they're dropping the plan to hoist this thing up. The reason D is right is because it's a second reason, and that reason is very, very different, and it supports the idea that they're not going to lift it up. So the big idea is, when we say the main idea of the paragraph, we need this to be something that actually goes with the idea that we're not hoisting something up. So I don't dislike, well, okay, so C is not a good reason because we're talking about what they're doing now, not later. So C is out. Now, I don't know, maybe other Renaissance depictions of David were in existence at that moment, so I can't cross that off. The fact that it depicted a favorite biblical story, I guess, is maybe an okay reason. A and B are okay. But this one actually has to do with the main idea of the paragraph, which is like discarding the plan to hoist the statue. So, that is a really tricky question, but in this case, it's really about the best answer, not that the other ones are technically wrong. And it's also about noticing how the prompt leads you somewhere. The main idea of the paragraph is about discarding the plan to hoist the statue. Okay. Tricky question. Moving right along here. That was 31. I think this is it. 32, 33. Okay, so let's see. Okay, right away I'm noticing symbolize and represent mean roughly the same thing. All the answers that use the extra language are going to be wrong. This is a redundancy question. Once you learn to recognize these, they're fairly straightforward. Symbolize and represent mean exactly the same thing. So go for the simplest one. 33, the writer wants to revise the underlined portion so that the concluding sentence summarizes the main ideas of the passage. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? Okay, so revise the underlined portions so the concluding sentence summarizes the main ideas of the passage. What are the main ideas of the passage? We could go back to the very beginning of the passage and find out. So let's do that. I'll go to the result, the last sentence of the first paragraph is usually a good place to go. The first result of the members' plans brought great acclaim, though not quite in the way they had anticipated. So it was a success, but not in the way of like putting these things on the buttresses like they wanted to. So thus, the guild members achieved their goal of enhancing Florence's prestige in every case, and Michelangelo was hailed as a hero in his own right for conquering the giant and giving Florence. That looks pretty good. So moving on to other things about Michelangelo doesn't make sense. We should talk about the giant, which was the marble, and it was a good monument. So I don't think it makes sense to talk about a different town in Sistine Chapel, especially after parts of the statue were decorated with gold. Random extra information, not a good way to finish the whole thing off, because we're like, wait, it was decorated with gold? What does it look like now? How did that happen? Why? Right? So this asks new questions. If you have new questions, that's not a good conclusion. But even though it boasts works of art, Interest D is like completely undermining the point. Italy's only the 5th in terms of generating revenue by tourism. Like, what a weird comment. That has nothing to do with the passage. The passage is about this moment where this masterful statue was created and how it increased the prestige of Florence. Okay, so I hope that one makes sense to you. Again, feel free to ask any questions you want so that we can further our understanding of these questions. I think this is the next set here. And by the way, be notating all this stuff. If you aren't writing down notes while you're watching these videos, you're at risk of making this into sort of like what I call infotainment. So the idea of infotainment is you're not really taking full advantage of the learning. You're kind of just sitting back and hoping that it sort of just sinks in. Take an active role in any educational situation, whether that's these videos, whether that's class, whether that's, reading a book. Like, you should read a book with a pen in your hand if you're reading a book for the sake of learning and not just for pleasure. Because your job is to actively engage with the information so that you can come to understand something that you didn't already understand. So education doesn't oftentimes work by osmosis. What it works by is an interchange of ideas and an exchange of ideas. The fact that you're watching this video is a great start, but really what you should be doing is writing down the important things that you learn, pausing the video, thinking about what's not making sense to you, writing down questions for me in those moments, rewatching spots, seeing if it makes more sense the second time through. Okay, so as we go through this page, I'm already seeing we have a couple good punctuation questions, but we start with an introduction to the paragraph. So it's tricky because we don't know what this passage is about yet, except it's called Sharing for Success. So let's read some other parts of this paragraph. Both Julie Levine and Julie Rocco, great, so two Julies, desired a healthier work-life balance, but they were hesitant to give up their managerial roles overseeing the production of new vehicles. In order to retain, so this is the big part, the end of the paragraph, it's usually where you see a thesis. In order to retain these top engineers, the company proposed a creative solution, job sharing. Well, look, I think answer choice A is pretty broad, which is okay. Companies are always searching for new and innovative ways to recruit employees. I kind of feel like these two are just like the same level of broadness. This reminds me of the question we just talked about a couple questions back about a second reason that had to do with the main topic of the paragraph. These are both kind of like fine. Two highly successful full-time engineers, so that tells us who these people are, which makes sense because like otherwise we have to sort of like infer that they're managers here on the production of new vehicles, and that they're engineers down below where it says top engineers. It's better to just introduce them directly. In 2007, two highly successful full-time engineers faced the same dilemma. What dilemma? Who are these people? Julie and Julie. Here's their dilemma, right? So usually when sentences work best together, the preceding sentence sort of presents you with material that asks you a question, and then that question is answered in the next sentence. This bit of data isn't a good way to introduce the concept of these two ladies trying to figure out their work-life balance or something. Okay, so those can be tricky, but I want you to notice that in this case, which is true oftentimes when we're talking about like adding a sentence or changing a sentence, we're looking for the best one, and the best one has to do with being extra specific about this idea of the best introduction of the paragraph. So hopefully that helps. Okay, 35 and 36 are really straightforward in the sense that I can cross off A and B because a semicolon and a period on this test do exactly the same thing. They both separate two full sentences. So now I have a simpler question, which is, do I need punctuation in between? Because if I do, it's D, and if I don't, it's C. The company, so I'm starting after this comma, because look, before this comma, it starts with a preposition. In order to retain these top engineers, that's not a full sentence. The company proposed a creative solution. That's a full sentence. That's what we need for a colon, is a full sentence. And then what we need is that, for example, or the best one is namely, can be replaced by the colon. So I'll try this out. The company proposed a creative solution, namely job sharing. That's perfect. D. Okay, so for number 36, the first thing I'm drawn to is the long dash and the colon. Those are the same, and I'd cross them off like I did in 35, except the only situation they're not the same is if you have two long dashes. So I go back through, I look for a second long dash. Aha, there's one right here. So I'm wondering if this is all like a set of parentheses. So if that's true, then I should be able to read around this information. I'm crossing it off here. As demand for flexible work options in today's marketplace has grown, job sharing has become more common. That's perfect. Parentheses. So I could cross off C and D because they don't create a full sentence, and I could cross off A because it also interrupts the sentence so that there is no full sentence. So let me show you what I mean, just to be absolutely clear. In order to use a semicolon, you need two full sentences. The first sentence is not full. The same thing is true with a colon. You need at least a full sentence first. I see first, whatever after. So let's see. Hey, I've got to tell you something. As the demand for flexible working options in today's job marketplace has grown, job sharing. Like, wait, you didn't tell me anything yet. You started to set it up like you were going to tell me something, but you didn't tell me something. So you can cross off C and D. Okay, as is, we do have some commas. We could make some sort of basic ideas. Would be like, okay, look, actually, there's actually a more. I don't have to worry about the commas, just the long dash. The long dash means if there's only one of them, which is what answer choice A is doing, even though A is way back here, sharing way back here, it leaves this long dash alone. If that's the case, then we have to have a full sentence before the long dash. Hey, I've got to tell you something. So now this is me testing out to see if it's a sentence. Hey, I've got to tell you something. As the demand for flexible working options in today's marketplace has grown, job sharing, an arrangement in which one full-time job is split between two employees. All right, can you notice that that's not a full sentence? That I didn't tell you anything? There's a lot of words, but I didn't tell you anything. So I just proved all three of those wrong. It's got to be B. Working as parentheses, notice I crossed off the stuff from after sharing. If we put a long dash in here, then you can cross everything off in between. Sorry, straight line tool is failing me. And read around it. Notice the other thing, just to sharpen up on commas. If there's a comma here, the question is the full sentence before or after? There's only one comma. It has to be before or after. It's after. You don't usually start independent clauses with words like as. You usually start with subjects. Job sharing has become more common. Okay, cool. Let's keep going here. That was 36. Let's find 37. Let's see. I don't know. I'm guessing that's it. Yeah, here we go. Cool. Okay, so we're looking to combine sentences in number 37. 9 times out of 10, it's not comma and it's not semicolon. In fact, 10 times out of 10. So cross those off because that's not a meaningful combination of ideas. That's just, sort of tacking, something together without really changing, without combining the sentences in a meaningful way. Okay. Without having while still not having. I don't know. Let's see. For Levine and Rocco, who were compensated 80% of their full-time salaries and benefits, job sharing was a way of continuing to climb the career ladder without having to work. Okay, so I think I would pick C just because it's simpler. Without having while still not having. I mean, if without having works, then go with it. While still not having to work the long hours. Oh, so the technical reason D is wrong is that still not having to work long hours. They used to have to work it, so still not having to work long hours sounds like they never had to work those long hours. But they did, because these are people who are scaling back their work from full-time to 80% of full-time. Or maybe half-time, part-time is bottom. I don't know if it's 80% of the time. It's 80% of the money, but maybe not 80% of the time. The bottom line is regardless of that, still, in answer choice D, sounds like they never were working the long hours. They were before, and they changed. So still is wrong for that reason. Okay, 38. Oh, good one. So notice, once again, like we start with a preposition. We start with in, and then we have a comma. That's not a full sentence. Hey, I've got to tell you something. In determining how working time and responsibilities would be divided. You're like, what were you going to tell me? So look, the deal with these questions is only one answer will have the right subject, the group that actually does this action. If you have a dependent clause, comma, independent clause, the dependent clause must refer to the subject right at the beginning. Otherwise, why put it at the beginning? If it refers to the object at the end of the sentence, then put it at the end, right? So we can't change the placement of this dependent clause. Therefore, it must refer to the subject. Therefore, the only group that is doing the determining, the people that are determining how working time and responsibilities will be divided, that's Levine and Rocco. Now, the sneakiest answer is D. But this is still saying that the steps, just like answer choice A, the steps were the ones determining how working time and responsibility would be divided. But of course, the steps were not doing that determination, right? People are the only ones that can do the determination. And answer choice B is the classic passive voice. Instead of Levine and Rocco taking steps, or that instead of saying Levine and Rocco took steps, instead there were steps taken by Levine and Rocco. So notice that the subject, Levine and Rocco, becomes the object. And there were steps taken. That inversion of ideas where the subject becomes the object, that's the passive voice. Right? There were steps. There's no subject that does anything there. So that's a passive voice, which is always to be avoided. But you can notice these questions in advance because you'll almost always see a one answer choice that does possession. If they're all about possession, then it's probably a possession question. If only one of them is about possession, and if you see a passive voice, and if we're talking about something underlined in the second clause of a sentence, especially if the first clause is dependent, then you know what you're dealing with. Okay, so that's a good one, and please ask me more questions about it if you have questions. In the meantime, I'll move on. 39, I'm going to cross off A, because nevertheless is a subset of however. Remember, nevertheless is a specific, smaller entity that resides in the larger entity of however. So like if however works in all of these situations, nevertheless works in a subset of those situations. The problem is, if you pick, here nevertheless is my dark circle, and my larger shape is however. If you pick the dark circle, even if it were right, would imply that also anything here is right as well. So if nevertheless is correct, so is however. We can't have two correct answers on a multiple choice test like this. So we can cross off the answer that implies that there is two correct answers. So nevertheless is a subset of the larger category of however, and therefore it can never be right in the presence of however. So now we have three answers. To this end, which means like sort of like cause and effect, right? Or in order to make something happen, you don't have to have a definitional understanding of these words. You just have to have a sense of them, right? So we're talking about something like cause and effect, or two things working together. In order to do this is another way of saying B. C is of course contrast. D is saying that they're the same thing. So those are three very different kind of relationships between sentences. So let's see what the relationship between these sentences is. It's our job to be seen. Well, I'm going to read a little bit further back. They took steps to ensure that the arrangement provided fluidity and consistency for the employees whom they jointly managed. Okay, so they're working to make sure that their employees don't suffer from them working as a team. Okay. It's our job to be seamless, they noted. They each plan to work 3 days a week with a day of overlap on Wednesdays. They also plan to talk on the phone. Oops, sorry for zooming out like that. I didn't mean to do that. I thought I could scroll, but then I realized I can't scroll in this situation. Let me go over here. I need to be able to keep reading further down in this sentence. So, look, it's what the previous sentence is saying is that these folks are working together and that they need to be fluid and seamless. They each plan to work 3 days a week with a day of overlap on Wednesdays. They also plan to talk on the phone each evening to discuss the day's work. So I think what we're saying is the ways that they're trying to accomplish the idea of seamlessness. So to this end, you could read the beginning here and think, oh, however, because they only each work 3 days a week, so it's not seamless. But that's not the case. So to this end is the best answer because it's saying they're trying. Sorry, I should drink more coffee. They're trying to be seamless, and this is the ways in which they're trying to accomplish that seamlessness. To accomplish this, to this end. Okay? So if you if you don't know, if you feel like to this end is something that you're not that familiar with, if you can cross these off, then you're good. You have to be willing, especially near the end of the test, number 39 is near the end, to pick stuff that sounds a little bit outside of your comfort zone if you're certain that the other ones are wrong. And you can totally be certain that these other ones are wrong if you do enough reading, continue on to the next page. So finish the sentence. Don't just read the first clause. They each plan to work 3 days a week. Could lead you to however, but if you read the whole thing, you can see that they're trying to work together. They've got a plan to be seamless. So you can't say it's a contrast. And it's not similarly because it's not the same. Being seamless is not the same thing as working 3 days a week and talking on the phone. Those are ways that you accomplish seamlessness. Those are ways that you accomplish fluidity and consistency. They're not the same thing as fluidity and consistency, right? So if you can cross those off, then you can pick to this end. And sometimes you're going to pick an answer near the end of the test that's going to seem a little bit strange, but that's okay. And you should be ready for the idea that process of elimination is your best friend near the end of the test. You'll probably have time too. Usually these passages aren't too bad in terms of time. I'm going to guess that this is it. Yeah, this is it. Okay, cool. So which choice best sets up the information that follows in the next part of the sentence? Okay, pay attention to the idea of the next part of the sentence. We want to set up that information. Here's the information in the next part of the sentence. It's the quote. When you have to analyze your day and share it with another brain, you show up the next day ready to run. So essentially the idea is accountability, I think. It's not that they had doubts. It's not that they were, maybe it's that they were successful. It's not the number of hours. Enhanced job performance, right? Because here's the idea. If it enhanced job performance, because you have to go tell somebody. You have to analyze your day and share it with another brain. So you show up the next day ready to run because you're like, okay, I have to talk about this later, right? So it makes them work harder and better and enhance their job performance. It's not about doubts. It's not about the number of hours. And it's not about the fact that they were the highest ranking shared job at the company. Because what if shared jobs were just not that good, right? Nor is this quote saying, we're great, right? So the big thing is matching this up. It has to be super specific. So we've seen this over and over again in this video here. Specific. How do we get the best answer to set up the information in the next part of the sentence? Enhance job performance. Okay, 41. Which choice best sets up the main discussion of the paragraph? So the same kind of question. Okay, we're talking about the downsides. If they have, discordant, I know we might change that word down here, capabilities, or unable to communicate effectively, the arrangement may not be successful. Extra costs. Okay, so downsides. Now, this is good because if there's multiple challenges, then that's going to work. Let's see. Some workers have responsibilities that are difficult to share. Now, I know I said specific, but look, it's language fallacy here in the sense that I could say that the best answer for this question is the broadest and vaguest that is accurate. I could also say that focusing on specifics still helps us because if we focus on the specifics of each answer choice, we could say that there's the specifics of those answer choices make it wrong. I could also say something about like the fact that, you know, what I meant by specific on number 40 and on previous questions is specifically addressing the question, not how detailed the information is, but specifically addressing the question. So this is a little bit tricky, but the problem with B is that it's not just about responsibilities that are harder to share. It's about all the different ways. And if we, you know, go to the PDF so I can scroll, the costs of employees or the cost to companies is not just about responsibilities of the employees. So we see different downsides mentioned in each of these, right? So the idea that responsibilities are difficult to share doesn't match the entire paragraph, which includes the fact that it's going to cost more money for the companies, right? And the same thing with C. This doesn't cover the full range of this paragraph. And this is not negative. D is not negative. We need an answer that's saying the downsides of job sharing. Job sharing may present some challenges, though. Remember I said that paragraphs often work so that one sentence will set up a question that's answered in the next sentence? Job sharing may present some challenges, though. What do you mean by challenges? Well, if job sharers have discordant capabilities, are unable to communicate effectively, then it may not be successful. Also, job sharing initiatives cost extra money, right? So we're seeing multiple challenges. Okay. And this 42 is a word choice one. There's not too much to say about this question. But the best word is mismatched. Notice all these words are fairly formal. None of them say like, you know, the employees didn't gel together or something like that. So contrary capabilities, you could have opposite capabilities that work. Capabilities that are irreconcilable. You don't have to reconcile your capabilities. You just have to have them sort of like, they could be opposite. So discordant is pretty darn close. I feel like the difference between mismatch and discordant is only the idea that we are putting people together. So the idea of matching them sounds really good. Discordant, I really think almost works here. But in this case, the word match is better. So don't worry about the word choice ones too much. If you can get it down to one of those two answers, you're pretty much where I'm at. And, you know, I can get like a 44, you know, I can get 400 or 390 on pretty much every one of these tests, right? So in between those two answers, that's pretty close. Think about the differences. The way you could tell the differences, be like, what is, you know, sure, they both work. What's different about them? Okay, discordant usually means things that just like clash. Mismatch means things that don't work perfectly together or don't go together, right? And don't go together has more to do with the idea of putting two people in the same job. Okay, challenging stuff. Last couple questions here. Oh, you know what I gotta do is I've gotta put the previous stuff up so that you can understand 43. Because 43 is the end of a sentence that got cut off here. It's going to be annoying. Let's do this. That's enough. Okay, cool. So now we have this whole paragraph here. Pay no attention to this. So the reason I'm saying that is this is a question about comparisons. Anytime you see words like those and that of, that's comparisons. So what are we comparing? Since the salaries and costs of benefits for two job sharing employees are usually higher than two things, are usually higher than the salaries and costs of benefits. So it can't be that of, it can't be being, it can't be D, because you can't compare the salaries and cost benefits for two employees to just employees. So to sharpen that up, you can't say, I can't compare salaries and costs to an employee. I have to compare salaries and costs of two employees to salaries and costs of, or salary and cost of one employee. Those for a single employee. So look, they mess with this idea of single. I even had the second doubt in my head about like, oh, that because single employees has a single salary. But even if it's a single salary and even if it's a single cost, together that's two things, right? So salary and cost are usually for two employees is usually higher than these same two things, those same two things for, a single employee. So that's why C is the best answer. It's about comparisons and it's about plural. So notice that I'm using the answer choices to tell me what the question's about. That of, those of, or do we. Totally going to be about like whether or not, it could be about redundancy or it could be about comparisons. Those would be like a good place to start. Right? Okay, so could be about redundancy because I see like delete as an option. Anyways, 44. Those enable, any of them enables, it enables, they enable. Who or what are we talking about? Who is they or it or those? Proponents contend that the investment is worth it because the investment. Proponents contend that the investment is worthwhile because the investment enables companies to retain their most talented employees. The investment is singular. The proponents don't enable companies, so it's not they. So here's the deal. You got to find what word, who or what. That's my big phrase for these questions. Who or what. So like who or what enable companies to retain the most talented employees? Apparently these like programs, right? So I say these programs, but there's no phrase these programs in the sentence. So find the closest word that would fit in there sensibly from the previous information. So, however, proponents contend that the investment is worthwhile because the investment enables companies to retain the most talented employees. So that's why D is the best answer. If it's any of them, it's like, I don't know who we're talking about, or those. Like, is it the benefits from the previous sentence? But now we're talking about going like a few nouns back, right? We have like the investment, we have proponents. It's not that the proponents don't enable companies to retain the most talented employees, so that's how. And it's really far-fetched to say that we're going to use they or those or them to describe a noun that's like a bunch of nouns back, before investment, before proponents, before single employee, all the way back to like the costs and salaries. Maybe someone could say the salaries and the costs of benefits enable them. It's like, no, not really. Those are sort of things that they're weighing against. It's like, even though these things are higher, it's worth it. So you got to find the noun that matches. Who or what enables the companies to retain the most talented employees? Cool. Hopefully that's helpful. So review your notes. Go back through any questions that don't make sense to you. A great thing to do is to review the questions again without these videos and talk to yourself out loud if necessary. Make sure that you can understand these videos or these questions on your own now, right? If you got some questions wrong in the first 22, see if any of these rules can help you create maybe a hypothesis about why your answer was wrong and why a different answer is right. You want to feel like you own this material. Take advantage of every mistake you've made and use it to your advantage on the next set of questions. So hopefully that's helpful, and I hope to see you soon. Take care and happy studying.